Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy. And what's the correct end to open a banana from?
Well, it's got a handle on it, doesn't it?
Well, so you mean like the stem part at the top? That's where you'd open it.
I think so. I'm not a banana person.
Oh, so this doesn't really work that well then.
I have opened a banana, and when I've done it from the top. I haven't seen anybody open it from the bottom.
Really?
Never. Like I said, I'm not maybe around bananas that often. Um, not in their true form anyway.
See, this is perfect because to me, you open it from the bottom end.
Why?
That's the only way because you pinch and peel, pinch and peel.
Really?
Yeah, you just like two fingers, you can pinch like, I guess it's called like, what is it? The butt end of the banana, whatever, the opposite end of the
Sure.
stem where they're
Yeah.
all bunched together.
Yeah.
And you just pinch it and the banana breaks open. You can just pull the peel right off.
Really? And it just like squeezes at the top a little bit or something?
Oh, no, but it's just like because that's where like I don't know what it's called. It's like the seed or
Okay.
something like the
Sure.
part at the top. So and obviously a banana is not like a super firm object. So you
Yeah.
can pinch it and
Uh-huh.
it'll split open the peel. And then you have like the peel is now damaged and you can just pull it. And it kind of
And
like the peel just splits in two.
okay, so it like splits from the bottom going up, like the peel splits, or is it like the gets pushed out the
No,
top
no.
where
You
the
take the
stem is?
peel off. So I'd be
Okay.
like, you could be holding the banana, you pinch it and you peel it off. And then the banana is just like there. And then you just can peel off the other end and done.
Hmm, interesting. I might have to give that one a go. Not that I'm going to be eating a lot of bananas, but Rowan just bought some, so I might have to.
Well, now you can try it.
I can try it. Yeah,
You
that's
can eat
interesting.
one banana and open it from the top end by the stem, and eat another banana and open it from the bottom end.
I don't think I'm going to eat them. I think if anything, I'll open it for her or open it and then throw it in the garbage. I'm not going to do that. Obviously, I'm not going
Yeah,
to do that.
you will
If
offer bananas
anyone's,
to people. Do you want to have a banana? I'll open it for you.
yeah,
It's
or
for
maybe
science.
I'll just wait in the kitchen for anybody coming and just ask if they want a banana and then offer it. I'll be like like the whoever stands in the bathroom and offers to like dry your hands or give you
Oh
a
yeah, what
spray
a
of cologne or something like that.
yeah. You're just there in the kitchen. Just,
Yeah.
banana? Yeah. No. Okay. All right. I'll
Yeah.
see you in an hour.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, you are a banana guy though. Like
Well,
you like
I
eating
eat like two or
bananas.
three bananas a day.
Really?
Yeah, I love bananas.
That
Like
sounds like
love it.
so many. That sounds like so many.
Yeah, like I get some weird looks at the grocery store. Um, like when I'm at the checkout,
Yeah.
and they're probably wondering like, why does this guy have like 20 bananas? Because I'll like wheel the cart by you know, wherever the bananas are in the produce, and then I'll
Yeah.
just like grab like two or three bunches of them,
Wow.
depending on how many are in the bunch. And
Yeah.
then there's just like a ton of bananas.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you want three a day, that's
Yeah,
21 per week.
that's it.
So,
Yeah, two to three per day is typically at least two, sometimes three.
jeez, that's crazy,
So
man.
I'm buying at least 14 bananas a week.
Yeah, minimum. That's insane. See, like I like the banana taste, but I don't really like the texture of it because it's like mushy and stringy, kind of.
Well, you pull the strings off.
Well, and you see, these are the tricks I don't know. But like even the mush part of it
The
is
most part
not.
you can't change.
Yeah, that's not my favorite. But I do like banana muffins or banana chocolate chip muffins are great.
Yeah, so if you work a banana flavor into something, then you're good with that.
Yeah, yeah, I like the flavor of it for sure. But yeah, not a banana fruit guy.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure because I've gotten some weird looks before when like I pinch the banana and then just peel, and they're like, "You don't open it from the top." I'm like, "Who opens it from the top? That's stupid. It's not as efficient."
But have you? Well, okay, that's fair. But I feel like it's the really normal thing to do. I feel like 90% of the people open it from the top.
I don't know where I saw it, but I saw a monkey one time open a banana that way.
From the bottom.
Yeah, and I was like, "Yo, that's so smart."
Well, yeah, if the monkey's doing it, then that's the right way.
So, and I don't know where I saw it, like whether it was on like a nature documentary or I've only been to a zoo once, so I don't think I saw some sort of like primate in a zoo do it.
Hmm.
Um, But it's just like, man, that's brilliant. Like that's so much better to me. There's three ways to open a banana. You can open it from the bottom end.
Hmm.
You can open it from the stem,
Hmm.
or there's some really sick and twisted people that use a knife to open a banana. And I don't know why. That's the worst way to do that. Almost shouldn't even be an option.
Yeah, I was wondering how ridiculous you were gonna get with the third option. I was worried you might talk about like biting it like like an apple.
I've
Just to
never
make
seen
it
that,
right.
but I'm sure someone's done it.
I'm sure people have done it. I haven't seen it either, but
I have seen people open it with a knife though.
yeah, I
So
believe
like
you.
they'll cut like I guess an indent in the stem the same way like if you had an axe and you're chopping like
Mm,
an indent into a tree,
yeah,
and then they have a place to like then rip the stem off
they're not
and open
strong
it.
enough.
Yeah.
They're not to break the skin. Maybe that's funny.
So then I was just curious. I was like, oh, I wonder what
Yeah,
end from the banana Braden opens it up from.
definitely the top, but I can see how it's not the most. Like I haven't tried the pinching method, but I can see like there's. It seems to me that there's inherent inefficiencies in opening it from the top because you're like relying on the skin ripping somewhere, and it could rip anywhere. Honestly, you might honestly like fold the banana before you rip the skin sometimes.
I just think it's easier. Like the stem is obviously way thicker and tougher
Yeah.
compared to the bottom. So you just like that's yeah.
Well, and if a monkey's doing it too, then that's like, who am I to say to a monkey that they're doing it wrong?
Well, I mean that's just anecdotal too. Like maybe it was just that monkey in particular.
I don't think so,
Uh,
honestly. I feel like animals just know how to, like they've tried obviously over however many generations, and they figured out the best way. I feel like I saw a video earlier today, I think, of a panda eating bamboo, and it was crazy. Like there was just it like hooked the outside sheath of the bamboo between a couple of teeth, twisted, and then like the casing for like maybe 6 inches of the bamboo like just ripped off all at once, and then it takes a bite of like whatever's inside the
yeah.
bamboo, and then
Keeps
hooks it and just cracks it again. Where I don't know if a human would do that, but they wouldn't do it as well as the panda, I'm sure. It's just so efficient.
so survival of the fittest, maybe. And the monkeys who open the bananas from the bottom end are the ones that have survived.
Well, I mean, they eat more bananas, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So,
Like I said, that's just strictly anecdotal because
yeah.
I saw it. And like I said, maybe Google has an answer. If I Google what end of the bananas do monkeys open it, or primates or chimps, or I don't even know what type of primates actually eat bananas. Um, but maybe it's worth searching up.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know. I know bananas grow in Central South America. Um, Outside of that, I'm not sure, but there's monkeys down there.
I was gonna say I don't even know where monkeys actually live.
Definitely, I've seen monkeys in Costa Rica. So
Like I think of them as more tropical. Like they live in warmer climates.
yeah, they like the jungle. So,
Yeah,
but there's monkeys in Africa too. Um,
that's mean. There's different types of like they're all primates, right? So there's
yeah,
different
yeah,
types
yeah,
of. And I'm not as we've had wildlife talk on other random banters at the start, and we don't know our classes of animals very well. If
yeah.
there's one thing we've learned,
We're not zoologists. That's for
absolutely
sure.
not. So, oh, that's kind of a bummer. I didn't realize you didn't eat bananas all that much.
Yeah, not as much as, well. I mean, I don't think anybody eats them as much as you.
Probably not. But at least if you ate a couple of bananas a week, then you'd be like, oh yeah, this is how I open them. But I'll ask our next guest. That's what I'll do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I feel like I've eaten voluntarily, maybe like when I was a child and I didn't have a say in the matter. Um, or like if it was mushed up and I don't remember, you know, not counting those. I feel like I've eaten sub sub 10 for sure, maybe sub 5 bananas in my entire life.
Wow.
Yeah. Like if we're talking whole bananas, yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
We're on extreme ends of the spectrum then.
Yeah.
I'm going to
We
get
are.
potassium poisoning. and
Yeah.
you almost don't even know what a banana is.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think, well, yeah, you've eaten more bananas already this week probably than I've eaten in the last 15
Yeah,
years.
what am I? I think I'm down to like, yeah, I'm gonna go to the grocery store in like a day or two, and I got to get more because I only have 6 left.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Um, that I don't know why, but that reminded me of this comedy bit that so this guy was talking about like gorillas, just gorillas for whatever reason, and asking the audience, does anybody like gorillas? And people put up their hands. And this one lady was very adamant, like, yeah, I really like gorillas. And he's like, you don't like gorillas, you don't care about them. And then he asked her, okay, if all of the gorillas disappeared just one day, they fully disappeared and nobody reported it, how long would it take you to know? And of course, you, unless you're like going to see gorillas every day, you'd have no idea. You'd never know if
I
no
mean,
one
I've
reported it.
never seen a gorilla in real life. They're not in our climate. So how'd I know if they disappeared?
That's right. Yeah. And so like you probably want gorillas to still be alive, but if they weren't, it wouldn't change your life at all, probably.
No, you would have to be interacting with gorillas on a daily basis for that to change your life.
Yeah. And I suppose that's my relationship with bananas, is maybe that's how it reminded me.
If they disappeared, you wouldn't even know,
No,
and probably not.
probably not. Probably not. Unless I wanted to have a banana chocolate chip muffin and then I couldn't. But that's about it.
So
So
that's when you'd find out all the bananas disappeared.
yeah. hmm Um, but well, one thing you would notice immediately if it disappeared would be your muscle gains, your hypertrophy.
Oh, I feel like people pay sharp attention to that.
Yeah, they care about that. They care about their muscles. Well,
Why
I
there's
mean,
mirrors in a gym.
yeah,
You got to like if you don't look in the mirror and see your muscles still there, how else would you know they're still there? Like that's
yeah,
the only reason people flex in the mirror, and you know, okay, my muscles are still there. I'm in a good spot.
hmm Well, maybe if you try to lift something, if you try to lift something and it's hard or easy, you'd maybe know the status.
That's true.
Um, but that was actually, so we talked last time about, I think the gist of the research based talk we had last time was going to failure is good for hypertrophy.
Yeah, and dispelling some of the myths around the traditional guidelines, let's call them.
Yeah, yeah, that it seems to be going to failure or close to failure is the most important thing, and the rep range doesn't really matter. The weight range doesn't really matter as long as it gets you to that point for the most part.
Yeah,
Um,
going to failure takes priority over either of those two things.
yeah. Um, and yeah, so I just wanted to start this conversation off with like some other things that I found anyway that seem to help hypertrophy. But it seems to me that they all kind of align with fully activating the muscle or as much as is possible for your training status and things like that. Because what I believe to be, and based off of what I've read, it is that's the reason that going to failure is so important is if you go to the point where you can't lift the weight again, it's because all of the muscle fibers that you have access to are more or less exhausted.
Yeah, in theory, you've used everything you've got.
Yeah. Um, and some other things that I've read about was load or intensity being a little bit higher tends to have a little bit more of an impact, um, a longer range of motion. So going to the point where you feel some stretch Which those were the, I guess, the big two that align with that. I guess I should say in general, there's trends, I guess, in the research, but there's a lot of contradictory studies as well. Where sometimes something that you expect to happen doesn't happen. I don't know if you've seen similar stuff or not.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can think of is that because there's so many different ways to do hypertrophy, as long as you're going to failure, that with so many different options, with so many different paths available, you could then see, oh, well, they built more muscle with a lot of reps. Well, they built more muscle with a really full range of motion. They built a lot of muscle with heavier weight. But at the end of the day, they all probably lead back to that same path of, like you talked about, greater activation of the fibers and likely greater activation of the fibers through an activity to failure or close to your voluntary point of failure. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that's kind of what you've come across, where there's some things that kind of
Yeah.
differ to one another because there's so many different ways to potentially do it and accomplish that task.
Yeah. Well, okay. So in terms of the method to get to failure, one of the big ones that I found was just eccentric training, that a lot of studies cited a larger benefit for eccentric training only compared to concentric training only. And even some studies talking that eccentric only was better than eccentric and concentric together, like the traditional, down up kind of thing. But then there are some studies that say concentric only is better or yields a bigger impact or a trend towards a bigger impact. A similar kind of thing with training frequency. If you equate volume, I remember reading like a long time ago that generally speaking, if you do the same amount of work but split it up over more days, then a higher frequency is better. But I read a review by Brad Schoenfield and some people that was done last year, I think, based off of a bunch of new research on that. And it seems like generally it doesn't really matter. I don't think any of the volumes that they were doing were extreme, like crazy extreme. But like one day a week versus two, or two versus three, two versus four, like none of them really seem to matter that much. But some studies will say it does, and other studies will say it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably it depends on like the person too. Like some people respond really well to a lot of work. Other people don't respond very well to a lot of work. And there's going to be a balance of how much work do you need to do to get the body to trigger that response of building more muscle. But then how much time do you need to recover to actually build that muscle? Because if you just did stuff every single day and had no breaks and never, like if you just did the same thing over and over again, like you're not maximizing the recovery, and then you're not going to maximize the amount of tissue you can build up. So I can see there being a debate point on that, because some people might respond really well with like 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off. Other people might need 2 days on, 1 day off.
Well, yeah, with all of this stuff, it's going to be individual, and listening to not just the research, but some of the like quote unquote experts, I guess, in like that are actually coaching people. There seems to be like a kind of a bell curve sort of thing, or not a bell curve, like a inverted U or whatever, where the extremes are bad.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle is good. And like there's a range of good, obviously, but if you're doing an insane amount of volume, an insane amount of intensity, an insane amount of frequency, you're not going to get very far. And if you're doing nothing, then you're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
And where along that spectrum you end up is going to be individual. And one person was actually talking about something that I found really interesting, in that it maybe comes down to personality some of the time. And some people feel that they need to just get into the gym and throw heavy weights around and just like destroy themselves. And then other people are very calculated and want to stick to that like 8.5 RPE kind of thing, leave a couple reps in the tank, accrue volume, and steadily build over the course of their training block kind of thing. And it's very meticulous, and it's not like the difference between, I guess, a scientific gym bro and a meathead gym bro kind of thing. And one person might not have as much success doing the other thing, even though they're both perfectly viable.
That's interesting. I mean, intent makes a difference with a lot of things, right? If the intent is not there, then you're not going to get out of it necessarily what you need. So I mean, I can see why that would be the case, especially if we're talking about hypertrophy and you need to go to essentially what's voluntary failure. Only you know if you've actually pushed yourself close to voluntary failure or not. And if you did 10 reps of something that, it started to get tiring at 10 reps, but you could realistically do 25 reps with it, you probably would have to push closer to like 20 reps or something like that to get that hypertrophy response. Where if you just stopped, working or doing the exercise, once it started to get a little bit uncomfortable, then the intent probably isn't there to create the hypertrophy effect, because are you actually taking the tissues to the limit where we talked about, are you using all the fibers? Are you exhausting all the potential means you have to move whatever load? Because if you're not, then the body's not going to trigger a response saying we better build more muscle, because you didn't actually bring it to failure or close to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Another thing that some of these people were talking about was, if you like, there's a balance between the intensity, I guess, and the volume. So if you're doing, I don't know, maybe like 4 sets of pec flies or whatever, let's just arbitrarily, it's pec flies, 4 sets to absolute like RP 10 nothing in the tank failure. You're probably going to be, if you keep the weight the same, you're going to be decreasing reps every set, probably. But if you wanted to, stick with like an RP 9 or even like an RP 8 kind of thing, you'll probably be able to keep the reps more or less consistent across the set. So you're doing more overall reps there. And you'll probably be able to handle like 1 or 2 more sets and recover, generally speaking, the same. So then you're talking about doing like a 4 by, 10, 8, 9, 10, 9, 8, 7, for example, versus a full 6 by 10, something like that. So there's a balance there, and it's going to be very individual. There's a balance there that sometimes you're probably going to want to be more on the higher volume, lower intensity end, and sometimes you're going to want to be on the lower volume, higher intensity end. But the risk that they were talking about, especially for people with a lower training age, is that if you are aiming for that RP 8 or so, you don't necessarily know that you're there. Especially if you have a lower training age, because you don't have that body awareness. And we saw this working with some of the athletes we did at the university, where they felt that their potential ceiling was a lot lower than it actually was. In our, like, us having a better understanding, I guess, of how things are moving and what that feels like when you're just starting out, kind of thing. But things definitely feel a lot harder than they actually are when you're newer.
Well, and that's a great point to bring up, because again, those are 2 prime examples of different ways to take care of hypertrophy. And you can argue, potentially for both of those. Like you said, the one might work better for, call it a novice or a rookie, because it's really easy to know when you have nothing left in the tank, because you just can't get it done.
Mhm.
versus, like you said, having a more calculated, okay, I need to get pretty close to failure on the 10, but I still need to leave a rep or two in the tank. That's a skill. That's something that you develop over time. That's not something that every person innately walks into the weight room and has the ability to do.
Mhm.
You learn that by lifting heavy things, lifting light things, and realizing like, oh, this is the difference between light and heavy, working hard without having a ton of fatigue, right? So more in the strength realm where
Mhm.
like, yeah, it took a lot of effort to move that heavy back squat or heavy deadlift, but I'm still relatively fresh versus just going to the well and grinding out every single rep that you can. So I think that's a great point to bring up because yeah, that's maybe the biggest factor in terms of the individualized, it depends component of this. That might be the big variable to consider is what's the training age of this person and what falls within their skill set to actually be able to do if
Yeah,
you want to develop hypertrophy.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also fortunate that um, people with a very low training age, like people that have never been in the gym before, um, they don't need to go that close to failure to hypertrophy. Um, and doing anything at all is going to be a novel stimulus and is going to incite some change. But yeah, for people that have been going to the gym casually, once or twice a week for a year, maybe don't necessarily fully understand or wouldn't be able to. Like, I mean, I still with my powerlifters that have been training for like 5-10 years and have been competing and are at a very high level lifting, if they need to select a weight for an RP8 single, then they're pretty close most of the time, but not always. Like it is a skill, big time.
Yeah. And it's something you develop.
Hmm.
You can only develop it through repetition.
Yeah.
And that's for everything. How heavy, like intensity across the board, right? I'm sure for a cyclist to figure out how fast they have to pedal for whatever, in
Hmm.
terms of, oh, this is going to be a fast ride or a slow ride. Same thing for running. 70% of your running speed, that's a skill to figure out what kind of tempo and cadence you're at. And so for lifting weight, it's the same thing. It's repetition. You start to figure out. One thing you talked a little bit about the like the person who's going to the gym for the first time. Obviously, it's a brand new stimulus. They're probably going to build muscle as a result of just introducing a new thing to the body that it didn't have to do before. Versus someone who's been lifting before. You said you found some stuff on like the timelines of sort of what
Mm.
happens with the hypertrophy process, because I think that's important to know, because you don't want to spend 10 weeks doing something when you could have done it in 4 or 5.
Yeah, yeah,
Or you
yeah.
don't want to spend 4 weeks doing something when realistically you need to spend 8 weeks, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So I did find some stuff about the timeline, and of course it's going to be variable, and whatnot. But um, it with a lot of these studies, there was a lot of variability in when they were reporting seeing stuff. Um, and I think a lot of people listening to this will have heard the um, most of the gains, like if we're talking about increased performance in whatever exercise, um, within the first few weeks is going to be largely neural, in how the CNS and PNS reorganizes or increases activation or whatever to have a more controlled or a better synchronized movement pattern, making you don't need as much force to move the same weight kind of thing. So if you have the same force, you're moving more weight.
Yeah,
And
people get
then
more coordinated is what
yeah,
happens.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and then later is when you start to see the hypertrophy gains. And so, um, yeah, I don't know how people imagine it, but based off of that kind of description, it's like nothing is happening. And then all of a sudden you have hypertrophy, which is not the case. It is very gradual. Um, but some studies reported seeing a hypertrophy within like a week or like 10 days,
Oh wow, that's
something
quick.
like that. Yeah, and this is like measurable hypertrophy, not necessarily statistically significant at that point, but measurable, and associated with various, markers. Like you see protein synthesis jump up within like 4 hours of training, and that lasts for a while. But more detailed results looking at the differences between like the water volume, um, and like we talked about, a muscle biopsy is the most effective way. There was some other things that were um, able to discern between water volume and actual contractile
Probably
protein
like different scans of some
hypertrophy.
kind, I guess.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what they were, but for it to be statistically significant, it is a little bit later, and within the first couple of weeks, like the hypertrophy that you feel is going to be a lot of water still, like that muscle swelling, and a lot of the muscle protein synthesis is going to like reorganizing, restructuring the muscle, not necessarily making it bigger, just kind of, especially if you're doing a new exercise, or if you haven't trained, you're doing an exercise at all, then that work is going to be completely new for the muscle. So it's going to require a lot more. It's going to need to repair itself a lot more than it would otherwise. So it kind of reorganizes it, I think, to like handle that specific tension better. Um, and yeah, and so that initial increase in muscle protein synthesis is kind of going towards that, kind of reorganizing things, which I believe that would also make it easier for you to lift a little bit more weight. So it's not necessarily hypertrophy, but it's not necessarily it's definitely not neural either. Um,
Yeah, it's not purely coordinative in the sense that I've figured this movement out better than I did before.
yeah, exactly. It's that the muscle has changed in a way that makes lifting more efficient, but not a larger muscle. It's a different kind of a change than that,
Yeah.
um, which I find to be pretty interesting. Um, and then after that first workout, doing that new exercise, it's your body kind of sees it as it's not a new exercise anymore, and that like that muscle damage and that big time like reorganizing response and the soreness, like the muscle soreness, and the swelling is a lot less, going forward, regardless of, even if you only did like a couple of sets to an RP7, and then the next time you're doing more sets to an RP9, like you're still going to have some of those like swelling and soreness and things like that, but it's going to be a lot less.
It's never like that first day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where you
Exactly.
can't pick up your arms or walk upstairs or do
Mm-hmm.
even the simplest tasks without feeling like your body's just destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then it is later that the hypertrophy is significant, like in terms of contractile units. Um, Hypertrophy that's contributing to how much force the muscle is able to produce. Um, Again, like anything inside the muscle can grow. Like it can be the water, it can be the connective tissue, it can be like the mitochondrial volume or whatever. Um,
So things that don't necessarily contribute to how much force the muscle can produce.
exactly. Like the only thing that is going to produce force is the actin myosin that form the sarcomeres, that form the fascicles, that form the muscle fibers. So in terms of that specific hypertrophy, um, the most consistent, reliable number that I found in one of these reviews that looked at a lot of studies was 18 to 21 sessions in terms of statistically significant contractile unit hypertrophy. Obviously, like it's happening before that. It's not like there was zero and then all of a sudden it was statistically significant. But me as a coach thinking about it, is muscle hypertrophy that is not statistically significant necessarily valuable? Maybe, maybe not.
Statistical significance is it's a research thing.
It is absolutely. It can be present without it being statistically significant.
Yeah.
But I'm also kind of the opinion that if the hypertrophy that you did actually experience is not statistically significant, is that adding a meaningful amount of force production to your performance?
And 100% it could. It's a
It
little
could.
tougher with hypertrophy because you don't have a direct, like, oh, I hypertrophied this much, and then my lift went up 2 pounds. So therefore, every unit of hypertrophy is equal to whatever. It's hard to measure that.
Yeah.
But I mean, a study might look at something and go, oh, that was a minimal amount of muscle mass. But if you work with a power lifter who lifts 5 or 10 extra pounds in a lift, that could change their placing and therefore is important.
Absolutely.
And I know I've looked at potentiation studies before where it's like, oh, it only improved, jump distance by 5 centimeters. It wasn't statistically significant. Or it only improved sprint time by 0.02 seconds. But at the highest level, that could be the difference of being on the podium and not being on the podium.
Yeah.
So from a research standpoint, you go, that's not statistically significant. But from a coaching and performance standpoint, you go, well, if you're going to give me 5 centimeters on my jump, I'm taking it because that could be the difference.
Absolutely.
Just like 5 or 10 pounds on a lift.
Absolutely. So I guess that's kind of like a rough number to aim for: 18 to 21 sessions over 7 to 10 weeks. So 7 to 10 weeks doing 2 or 3 sessions per week.
Mm-hmm.
All these studies we're looking at, like all the sessions would have been focused on quadriceps only or hamstrings only or biceps only or whatever. So it's not like you're working out 4 days a week and then 18 sessions being, what's that, 6 weeks or whatever. So
if you did 4 sessions a week, you'd get the 16 sessions in 4 weeks.
Yeah. So it's not saying that, because you're going to do a bunch of different exercises over your 4 training days.
Yeah.
So if you're targeting, quadriceps growth specifically, then you want to be doing, a quadriceps focused workout twice, 2 or 3 times a week for 7 to 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Roughly.
For that 18 to 21 sessions.
Yeah. To hit that, for that statistically significant. Yeah.
It's a good starting point, though.
Yeah. It's
like we talked about, it's always individualized and everyone's going to be a little different, but having that ballpark of 18 to 21 sessions gives you somewhere to start at the very least.
Exactly. And also having an idea maybe how long you want to be keeping a certain exercise in.
Exactly.
Because this same review also cited kind of a curve where it's like a little bit flat and then it ramps and then it flattens again. So that 21 sessions might be like it shouldn't be a hard rule, I don't think, but it might be like a good cutoff where now we want to change the exercise kind of thing, or
move to something different or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. It might not be worth continuing that same thing past that.
Exactly. And it also might be potentially really damaging, not damaging, but damaging your progress for all the people that want to confuse their muscles all the time, to be switching exercises every 4 weeks or whatever. If the goal is hypertrophy, then it might be beneficial for you to keep that same exercise for 10 weeks potentially.
You need the consistency.
Yeah. And then after that, it diminishes. But, before that, you might just have like those baby ramps that are just keep getting cut off, And one other study, this was like the earliest, that was looking at muscle biopsies and measuring like water volume and things like that as well. So specific contractile unit hypertrophy. In terms of muscle fibers in general, statistical significance was later, but if looking at only type 2 fibers, which we know hypertrophy sooner and faster and to a larger degree, and are more important if we're talking about speed, strength, power, performance.
Yeah, that type of sporting stuff. Yeah.
One study found significant type 2 hypertrophy after 6 sessions over the course of 2 weeks. And continuing past that, there was more hypertrophy. But so that's another idea that you could, after 6 sessions, see something that is meaningful. So yeah, I mean, it's a really large window, but there's an idea anyway.
That's, I mean, at the very least, it's a launch point.
Mhm.
It's somewhere to go. Okay, where do I need to start with this? Why are we doing the hypertrophy? And yeah, maybe it's something as low as 6 to 8 sessions,
Mhm.
right? If that's what you're looking for, or maybe it's something that's, even longer than that, closer to that 18 to 21. But based on the goals, based on what you're trying to do, either of those should be able to give you a good starting point
Mhm.
to kind of figure it out. And is that
Yeah,
hypertrophy in terms of like cross sectional area? Is that what they were looking at?
yeah, they were.
Like like the width of the diameter of the muscle?
Yeah, that was the thing that I was most focused on. Um, but I did see one of the studies I looked at measured fascicle length and pennation angle as well, um, and that was interesting. That I think they found significant cross sectional area, or like type 2 hypertrophy or whatever. Like that kind of a change was significant at like 20 or 35 sessions, something in that range. Um, or so days, sorry. I can't
Okay.
they were training like 2 or 3 days a week, and it was 20 to 35 days was significant for that.
Yeah. So about 4 to
Um,
5 weeks of training, give or take.
yeah. Um, but the fascicle length and the pennation angle, that change was significant after 10 days, which I found really interesting. That kind of thing happens faster, essentially, which might go to the like the structural reorganizing, not necessarily growth of the muscle, but the reorganizing of it in that first kind of week or so, to make the muscle more receptive to that kind of tension specifically. Um, and that was kind of supported with some of the papers that you sent me as well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the hypertrophy stuff from a cross sectional area is not overly important because for almost every athlete I've ever worked with, it's about being at least just big enough. And then there's a premium on speed and how quickly you can produce the force and things like that. But the muscle hypertrophy change in terms of the length is really fascinating because we talked about it before. In theory, the larger the diameter of the muscle, the more force it produces. And in a similar way, the length is kind of related in the same way with the speed, or how quickly the muscle can contract and relax. So if we build the muscle in length, it can shorten and lengthen at a faster rate, which means the muscle moves faster, which means we can produce more speed and velocity in the movements we're doing. So to me, that type of hypertrophy is very, very interesting. How can we develop that in athletes? Because it'll prevent us from putting on too much size, but can also positively enhance the velocity qualities of the athlete,
Mhm.
which in most team evasion speed power sports, that's where the premium is.
Yes. Um, so talking about hypertrophy in length, I know that individual muscle fibers, that's like the fascicles, can lengthen. Obviously, that was some of the stuff that I came across. Um, and I know that sarcomeres can be added in
In
series.
series. Yeah.
Sarcomere is like a single unit of contractile proteins within a muscle. Um, Now, I'm not sure with that sarcomere being added in series, does that necessarily mean that the fascicle is longer now, or is it that um, each sarcomere is now at a shorter resting point? Do you know what I mean? Like the length maybe isn't 100% different, but it's within
Yeah,
a.
that's a good question. Some of the stuff that I read I didn't fully understand because it's like straight muscle physiology, right? In terms of like enzyme pathways and this
Mhm.
and that. Um, so I would imagine, I'm guessing it's changing in terms of there's more sarcomeres in series to
Mhm.
change speed because the idea, like your bones aren't changing length.
Yeah, absolutely not.
So the overall unit length can't really change tremendously because you only have so much structure to work with.
Mhm.
But it's possible maybe there's a relationship change between contractile tissue and like tendon tissue, for example.
Well, I
Uh,
was wondering if maybe the tendons, if you're increasing the length of the fascicles and more sarcomeres and series, that maybe the tendons are under a little bit less strain generally.
yeah. And like I said, that's the part where like enzyme pathways and things like that, I was like, okay, that's sort of beyond my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with the stuff that I looked at, which is the supermax eccentric training,
Hmm.
where you lower a weight that you can't pick up
Hmm.
or you can't move. So it would be if you could squat 300 pounds, you get into the squat rack and you put 350 pounds on the bar. And then you just lower yourself as slowly as you can with the weight and then put it on the safeties. And you're not actually moving the weight back up.
Hmm.
You're just lowering the weight. And so that type of super maximal eccentric work, lowering a weight that's heavier than you can actually lift, has been really has is shown to potentially have an effect on the change in muscle length, which then would help change the speed qualities of the
Hmm.
muscle,
And
um, which
that's
could be
helpful.
helpful.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and that's helpful too. I think because a lot of the stuff that I found about cross sectional area aligned with that as well, where super maximal or eccentric stuff to failure was better than concentric stuff to failure, generally speaking. Um,
Yeah. The interesting thing about that is, I mean, I would think that the concentric would be better because you're getting more activation of more of the fibers. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, the research on this supermax stuff in terms of creating muscle length change and then speed change, I'd say is probably like 50-50 or 60-40 in favor of it. It does seem to be something along the lines of like potentiation or ice tubs or things like that, where it tends to be maybe dependent on the individual, whether or not it works. So there's not necessarily a guarantee it works with everybody. But some of the theories behind why that actually changes the speed qualities is because it's thought to only affect the type 2 X fibers, which are the fastest fibers or the most powerful fibers. If we're talking type 1 being the weakest, type 2A being the intermediate, and then type 2X being the most powerful.
mm,
It targets those most powerful fibers that have the greatest influence on speed.
mm,
And then it's also shown to not change the pennation angle because
mm,
there's no concentric action. And so we know pennation angle is a bit of a happy medium. It can be skewed towards force production, but it can also be skewed towards velocity.
mm,
And it's a bit of an inverse. It comes at the detriment of one or the other,
mhm,
right? So you can skew it more towards, I'm going to make a little bit more force, but now I can't contract quite as quickly. Or I can make the muscle contract quite a little faster, but then the speed isn't quite there. And that's one of the reasons you see, someone maybe slow down if they do too much strength work
yeah,
because the
and
pennation
that's
angle starts to skew. But so it was interesting that this super heavy loading produced the speed change because of those, or it's theorized that that's why the change is
mm,
there. And the interesting thing with the type 2 is because if you think about lowering or putting down a load, that means the muscle is constantly lengthening, which means fibers have to start releasing tension at some point in order for that muscle to lengthen out. And of course, if you're holding on to a load that is heavier than you can lift, what fibers are going to let go first? The slow ones and
mm,
the weaker ones.
mhm,
And so, yeah, it was interesting to see that type of work targeted specifically the type 2X fibers because those were the ones that were really active the longest and we're the only ones that were sort of activated long enough to actually hypertrophy, because the other fibers are letting go of their tension in order to allow the weight to move down, because you couldn't keep all the muscles contracting and have those cross bridges connected and still have the muscle lengthen. Something has to release in order for that length change to happen. So, which again is a really interesting thing to maybe experiment with athletes where speed and power is on the premium.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think that it's another thing that I came across with regards to that Supermax eccentric stuff was whatever muscle fibers are hanging on, it's going to be like a lot of tension, obviously, like more tension than they can handle on those fibers. And then within one fascicle, there's going to be one or a few sarcomeres specifically that are the weakest or maybe the most overextended or whatever, just with their like resting position is longer than the other ones or something. And something with that can signal that we need more sarcomeres to handle this level of tension so that on average they can be in a more neutral position
Oh,
or something like
interesting.
that. Yeah, that was something. Again, like it's theories, but that was another thing that I read that I thought was interesting. Yeah, but that's really cool though.
It's just a
And
different take on hypertrophy, because it
yeah,
was something that, like we talked about, it's great for developing athletes to build more muscle mass because then they produce more force. That helps them in everything. But then at some point with speed power athletes or team sport athletes or things like that, you are big enough. And then you kind of think, well, hypertrophy is useless and it's something that you don't bother using anymore because you go, this isn't going to help us. But this is maybe a way to think about doing hypertrophy differently, especially if it's going to give you better contractile properties to move quickly. This type of stuff going into phases where you want to move fast and the muscle is going to be under a lot of stress from a velocity standpoint might be a really, really good like preamble into that.
yeah,
If it
100%,
works.
100%. Yeah, I mean, like yeah, for athletes in that situation, you don't want to be changing the pennation angle too much.
Or even the cross-sectional area as well, right?
Yeah. Adding more sarcomeres in series is also going to help with force production. So you're going to still get stronger from that standpoint. You're still going to get a lot of neural adaptations from handling that extreme load. So you're going to get stronger from that standpoint.
Exactly.
And yeah, it'll be a nice lead into strength. And you're not going to get as much, in my opinion anyway, of those neural adaptations and like practice loading with the heavy weight if you're doing more traditional hypertrophy. And
Because the
you might
load's
also
too light.
exactly, and you might also change the pennation angle in a different way. You know, so yeah, it could very well be a more beneficial hypertrophy that's going to give you more benefits than just hypertrophy for speed athletes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all gravy. It's, like I said, probably a 50-50 thing. Does it really work the way it's intended to? For some people it may, for some people it may not. It's extremely taxing.
Yes.
It's one of those things where you might run that block and it might take you another 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks, something like that, to recover fully, where you start to see the benefits on the concentric or the speed end. Like there's no way you're going to come out of doing something like that and then the following week be like, I'm jumping through the roof or I'm sprinting super fast, because the residual fatigue is tremendous from that amount of stuff. And it's really only an option for a really well-trained athlete.
Yeah.
You need to know what your 1RM is. What is 100%? Because if you don't know what 100% is, you can't figure out what 110, 120, 130% of your maximum load even is.
Yeah.
So it's a more advanced, probably, tool in the toolbox
Yeah.
based on the level of the athlete. But it's an interesting concept to even if it's 50-50, interesting concept to at least consider and have in your back pocket, because it may come into play somewhere.
Yeah. And even if it's 50-50, like that's, yeah, it's not that it doesn't work. It just might not work for some people or at whatever time. Like the timing matters, you know, the fatigue time. Like, is it okay for you to take a couple of weeks of, you know, lighter training to recover from that? There's all kinds of, you know, balances to play out, like volume, intensity, what your next blocks are going to be, things like that. It all is important when you're going to be using this stuff. But no, it's definitely an interesting toolbox tool for sure.
And at the very least, it's fun to talk about, like conceptually.
What do you remember what the speeds were? I don't know if you actually know. Um, I found one paper that was looking at the difference between slow supermax hypertrophy and fast supermax eccentric. Sorry, I don't know the actual speeds because they were looking at it might have been biceps or quads. It might have been hamstrings. I don't think it was though.
All the studies I was looking at were hamstring, because it's a
Yeah.
muscle that's built in series, so the length
Yes.
change is easier to kind of pick up on.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, continue where you were.
But it was some sort of joint, like what's that kind of joint called? I can't remember.
Like a hinge joint.
A hinge joint, yeah, exactly. So it was the elbow or knee, basically. And so they were measuring the hypertrophy the speed in radians.
Because they were on like the machine or whatever.
It's an angular velocity. So I don't actually know how fast it was. But the idea was they're selecting a weight in which you maximally contracting against the weight, it's still going to be an eccentric speed of this. So if you maximally I think it was 3.6 radians versus 1.6 radians per second, maybe something like that. So if you maximally contract against this weight and it takes you the weight like 2 radians per second or whatever to get you all the way down. But they need it to be faster or slower than that. Then they change the weight to make it faster or
to
slower.
match the speed. Yeah.
Yeah. And they found a bigger hypertrophy change in the faster group, which I thought was interesting. And it didn't talk about length or anything like that, but it made me, I feel like there's something there, especially for a speed athlete, you know?
Yeah, I have read some stuff where, like, most of the studies I looked at, it was controlled eccentric work. So you were, picking up a barbell and squatting it or hinging it, and you were trying to make the movement as slow as possible on the way down. But I have read some stuff on like what you're talking about, like this fast eccentric stuff, but I've never really seen it like played around with it all. Because some of it is like, when you look at like the old Russian literature of dropping off like 5-foot boxes, like that's a fast eccentric load. I'd rather just do the safer method of someone lowering themselves with a heavy load in a squat rack than dropping off of a stupid height. So, but I definitely think you're right. There is something there in terms of, are you doing the eccentric work with a very high rate of speed or a slower rate of speed?
Yeah. And I really,
it may even be a progression.
Yeah.
Once you can handle the slower stuff, when you introduce this for the first time, then maybe you can, if it works, start to explore the faster stuff, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to your point, like it's going to be more dangerous likely. That's another big part of the balance you're playing is it safe to do it this way? Is there a safer way to do it versus a more effective way to do it? But I do think the difference is likely explained that the group doing faster eccentrics was using a heavier weight because that's what it took to lower them that quickly. And yeah, I think that's really the difference in a lot of these interventions, is that the group that was doing generally heavier weight because they were doing maximal eccentric, or like super max eccentric, or super fast max eccentric. They're just using more weight for the same ish number of reps, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like you said, and the load is higher, and that ultimately, if you're at that 100+% loading, you're getting a tremendously not only high stimulus, but a novel stimulus as well,
Mm-hmm.
because they probably haven't done things that are 100+%. Because it's,
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is maybe the one exception where, give it 100, give it 110%.
Oh, there you
You
go.
could actually give it 110%
Mm-hmm.
realistically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The from that standpoint, it might be beneficial, honestly, just because it is a novel stimulus. Like if someone's been doing this all the time, then you want to go a different route. But if someone's never done this kind of thing, and maybe they've been stuck, then this could be a really, really solid way to tackle that problem. The one other interesting thing that I wanted to say that I came across in the research was that eccentric training also seemed to be more resilient in the hypertrophy that it produced. Um, it's not, again, not super conclusive, but a few studies looked at a concentric only, eccentric only training regimen for however many weeks, and then followed that with like 4 weeks of detraining, and then measured again.
Well, the eccentric group held on to their improvements better.
Yeah, in terms of
Interesting.
strength and hypertrophy. Um, yeah, which was interesting. And one of them was even like there was concentric, eccentric, and concentric, eccentric together. And the eccentric held on to the strength and hypertrophy better than the other two groups, which was interesting. Again, not 100%. Like this is just one or two studies. I didn't read any reviews on that specific topic.
Still fun to consider, though.
And it might, like, especially now with gyms opening and closing and opening and closing,
Yeah.
if you know that the gym's going to be closing, then I mean, you're probably not going to know that the gym's closing 5, 6, 8 weeks in advance, where you have time to get a meaningful amount of hypertrophy. But considering more maximal eccentric stuff might be,
Like I said, still fun to consider.
yeah,
Like
it might help you hold on to stuff.
it's a cool concept.
Yeah. So thought that was interesting. I don't have a smooth transition.
Music time.
Music time. Yeah. I guess, yeah, you're gonna, what the training you're doing isn't going to affect how your music taste detrains at all.
What do you mean by that?
I don't know, man. I was just
I just
trying to do
threw
it.
some words together.
I was just trying to do it. I thought I had something, but I didn't.
That's all right. I mean,
Yeah.
we transitioned into it when we said we don't know what we're doing as a transition. You
Yeah.
know a transition's coming.
Yeah. I got to
So
stop using that one though.
that's all right.
Yeah. What were you listening to? It's been a little bit longer now since we've recorded.
Oh, yeah, but you talked about some of the punk stuff last time.
Yeah, I did.
And I was like, man, I haven't listened to punk in forever. So,
Mhm.
of course, I've made a point and listened to some punk.
Mhm.
So I went to my go-to favorite punk band of all time, which is Rancid. They're my favorites. I had a bunch of Rancid albums playing. Oh Come the Wolves, Let the Dominoes Fall, Indestructible, all that good stuff. I love Rancid. To me, they're my favorite punk band. But then it also led me down an interesting path where I ended up listening to a whole bunch of music that was used like in the original Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, because it had all the punk and ska music. So it was like a bit of a trip down like memory lane of playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 and 3 and stuff like that. So yeah, I was heavy on the punk train this week, which was a
Very
lot of
nice.
fun.
Yeah.
It's typically fun and upbeat. Like it's high energy stuff. So
Some of those old video games, I mean, video game soundtracks, I think are almost all the time really good.
yeah, they kill it. I don't know how, but
Yeah.
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 So that was the punk rock adventure I went on since the last recording.
Very nice. Very nice. I actually didn't really, I listened to a little bit of punk stuff, but I had a harder time getting into it. Um, but I was reminded of, my, my favorite metal band, I guess. So I listened to a little bit, not a lot, but this is like the new stuff that I listened to, newish, was In This Moment is my personal favorite metal
They're
band.
pretty good.
They are quite good. They are quite good in my opinion. Um, I didn't, my all-time favorite PR song is by them. I did not listen to that, and I never listen to it unless I'm going for a PR.
You got to save that.
Yeah,
Save that.
exactly. But they do have a lot of good stuff. Um, I prefer their lighter stuff. They do have a good amount of lighter stuff, which is nice. Um, some of my favorites by them are their covers of other songs.
Yeah, they do
Uh,
some good covers.
they have a cover of um, what's that Phil Collins song? Uh,
In the air or
in the air,
tonight or
in the
I
air
don't
tonight. Yeah, yeah,
in the
that
air
one.
tonight. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
wasn't sure what it's actually called.
yeah, in the air tonight. Yeah, they have that. They do a cover of that,
The
which
Hangover
is
song.
yeah, it's is really really good. That cover. And I this week just learned that they have a cover of "We Will Rock You" by Queen.
Oh,
Yeah, which is good as well.
I haven't heard that one. I feel like that's a dangerous one to cover though.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like you got to do well on that.
Yeah,
Like
I liked it. I only listened to it the once, but I did like it. So yeah, I mean, let me know what you think. I guess.
yeah, I'll go check that one out for sure. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah,
listened to In This Moment in a while, but they're good. I like them. Like they're
yeah,
not bad.
hmm yeah. So yeah, that was my uh, venture outside of my K-pop comfort zone.
Yeah, we both went outside our comfort zones this week. That's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this was a good one.
Yeah, it was.
This is a good one. Um, maybe we'll have. I mean, do you want to do another hypertrophy one?
I'm open to whatever, man. I'm
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens then.
very adaptable.
Yeah, we'll see what happens then. Um, but yeah, as always, if you have questions about any of the stuff we talked about or want resources, we can send you whatever.
That was stuff we were reading or
Mhm.
used.
And yeah, or questions about anything, just let us know on Instagram. Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, Braden Southern. Um, yeah, that was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.